The drive home from dinner felt longer than it should have, not because of traffic, not because anything went wrong. It was a decent evening, actually. Good restaurant, easy conversation, a woman I'd been looking forward to getting to know. But somewhere on the 401, with the city lights thinning out behind me, I realized I was already thinking about something else. Or someone else. I pulled into the driveway a little after 9. The house was a two-story on a quiet street in Whitby, just east of Toronto, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave to each other in the morning and leave Christmas lights up a week too long. I'd been renting the lower unit for about 14 months. The owner, Cecily Hartman, lived upstairs. 55, maybe 57, a retired school administrator who had moved back into the property after her husband passed. She kept the driveway shoveled before I was even awake in the winter. She grew tomatoes in the backyard in the summer and left them in a bowl outside my door without ever saying she'd done it. I noticed her light was still on when I cut the engine. I wasn't expecting that. She was usually in bed by 8:30 on weeknights. She'd mentioned it once. She said her body had never stopped running on a school schedule, even after all these years. 8:30 in, 6:15 out, no exceptions. I grabbed my jacket off the passenger seat and headed toward the side entrance. The back porch connected both levels, and as I came around the corner, I saw her sitting on the top step with a mug in her hands, looking out at the yard. She looked up when she heard me. "You're back early," she said. It wasn't that late to begin with. She nodded at that like it told her something. "How'd it go?" I set my key against the lock but didn't turn it yet. It was fine. She was nice. We had pasta at that place on Dundas I told you about. The one with the patio? Yeah, patio was closed though. Too cold. Cecily turned the mug in her hands slowly. "But?" I looked at her. "But what?" "There's a but in there somewhere. I can hear it." I almost laughed. "No but. It was a good evening. I don't know. Wasn't feeling a connection, I guess." She didn't say anything to that. She just took a slow sip from her mug and looked back at the yard. The thing about Cecily Hartman was that she didn't push. She never had. In the 14 months I'd been living below her, she'd never once pried into my business, she asked, sometimes, when it was clear I wanted to talk. But she had a way of making silence feel like the most comfortable option in the room, and I'd always appreciated that. I said goodnight and went inside. Her name was Bridget Souza. We'd matched on Hinge about 3 weeks earlier. She was a physiotherapist from Oshawa, funny in her messages, easy to talk to. The dinner hadn't been bad at all. She'd ordered the gnocchi, told a story about a patient who'd tried to demonstrate a backflip in her office and failed spectacularly, laughed loudly enough that the table next to us glanced over, and I genuinely enjoyed it. But I kept thinking about the drive home. Kept thinking about Cecily on those steps, the porch light on, her mug in her hands. I told myself it meant nothing. She was up late. It happened. Some nights the quiet doesn't sit right and you just end up outside. I made a cup of tea I didn't finish and went to bed. About a week later, on a Saturday morning, I was trying to fix the leak under my kitchen sink. I'd watched 3 YouTube videos and bought the wrong part twice. The hardware store on Brock had finally sorted me out, and I was lying on the floor with a wrench and a certain amount of optimism when I heard a knock on my door. It was Cecily. She had her coat on, car keys in her hand. "I'm heading to Costco," she said. "Do you need anything?" "I'm good, thanks." She looked past me at the cabinet door lying open, the towels I'd shoved under the pipe. "How long has that been going?" "About 2 weeks. Cal," she said my name like a school teacher. "Just the one syllable." "I know." I kept putting it off. She stepped inside, crouched down beside the cabinet, looked at what I'd done so far. She'd grown up with a father who fixed everything himself, she'd told me once. A man who treated a leaky faucet as a personal insult. Some of it had rubbed off. "You've got the right part now?" "Think so." "Move over." I blinked. "What?" "Move over. I've done this before." We spent 40 minutes on the floor of my kitchen. She talked me through it the whole way, not taking over, just explaining as I went, handing me things before I had to ask. When the leak stopped, and we turned the water back on and nothing dripped, she made a sound of satisfaction that was so genuine it made me smile. "Where'd you learn to do plumbing?" I asked. "From necessity," she said. "When you're on your own, you figure it out or you pay someone." I wiped my hands on one of the old towels. "How long have you been on your own?" She was quiet for a second. My husband passed 6 years ago, so 6 years. I'm sorry. She waved it off. Not dismissively, just the way people do when they've made their peace with something and don't want the moment to become heavy. You get used to the shape of things eventually, she said. The house stops feeling wrong. I didn't know what to say to that. So I thanked her, and she went to Costco. Bridget and I went out again the following Friday. Drinks this time. A place in downtown Whitby with low lighting and a decent wine list. She was wearing a dark green blouse, and she'd mentioned she'd been nervous about this second date, which I thought was endearing. We sat for 2 hours. It flowed easily enough. When I walked her to her car, she turned around and kissed me, which I hadn't quite expected, and I kissed her back, and it was fine. It was genuinely fine. I drove home. Cecily's light was on again. I sat in the driveway for a minute longer than I needed to. Then I went inside, made sure not to think too hard about anything, and fell asleep with the television on. The next morning, Sunday, I came upstairs to return a casserole dish she'd lent me the month before. I'd finally washed it properly. She had this particular way of stacking dishes that made me think she noticed when they came back with water spots. She answered the door, in a cardigan and reading glasses, a novel folded in one hand. Behind her, the upstairs unit smelled like coffee and something baking. "Scones," she said before I could ask. "Come in if you want one." I followed her to her kitchen. It was arranged differently from mine. She'd pushed the table toward the window to catch the morning light, and the windowsill had a line of small plants I didn't know the names of. She cut me a scone while I sat down, set it on a plate with a little pot of jam, and then went back to the stove like it was nothing. "How was last night?" she asked. "Good," I said. "We had drinks at that wine bar on Dundas." "Bridget?" "Yeah." I paused. We kissed. Cecily didn't turn around right away. She poured her coffee, put the pot back, and then came to sit across from me with her own plate. "That's good," she said. "Is it?" She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Is it not?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "It was. She's a good person. Easy to be around." I stopped. "Keep what?" I shook my head. "Nothing, I don't know." She reached for the jam. She didn't push. It was 2 weeks later, a Tuesday evening, when something shifted. I'd come home from work. I'm a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm in Pickering, mostly commercial builds, and I was tired in that specific way that doesn't have much to do with the work itself. I heated up leftover soup, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at a text from Bridget asking if I wanted to grab dinner Thursday. I read it 4 times. Then I put my phone down and went upstairs. I don't know entirely why. I told myself I was going to return the umbrella she'd lent me during that week of rain in early October. That was technically true. I did bring the umbrella. She was in the living room when she answered, reading again, the same novel or maybe a new one. She looked at me, then at the umbrella in my hand. "You didn't have to bring that up tonight," she said. "I know. I was coming up anyway." She let me in. I sat on the couch that faced the window. She made tea without asking if I wanted any and brought it over, then sat in the chair across from me with her feet tucked up, which was a thing I'd noticed she did when she was comfortable. We talked for almost 2 hours. About her week. She was volunteering at the library now, helping with an adult literacy program she'd gotten involved with through the school board connections she still had. About mine, the job site in Markham that was 3 weeks behind schedule because of a foundation issue. About winter coming, about whether the furnace was running right, about her sister who was visiting from Halifax in December. At some point, the tea went cold, and neither of us got up to warm it. When I finally said I should let her sleep, she walked me to the door and leaned against the frame. "You never finished your thought," she said. "A few weeks ago, you said you keep something." I looked at her. "You remembered that." "I tend to," she said. I thought about it. Then I said, "I think I was going to say I keep comparing, which isn't fair to Bridget, and I know that." Cecily was quiet. Her expression was very still. Not blank, there was something moving behind it, but she'd made the decision not to let it out. "No," she said finally, "it isn't fair." I nodded, said goodnight, went downstairs. I saw Bridget twice more after that. The Thursday dinner. A Sunday afternoon walk along the waterfront trail in Oshawa, which was actually lovely, cold and bright, and she had good stories. And we stopped for hot chocolate at a little place near the marina. She told me about growing up in Brampton, about her parents who still called each other by their last names out of habit, about how she'd wanted to be a marine biologist until grade 10 when she'd discovered she was terrified of open water. I laughed at that one. She was funny. She was genuinely, easily funny. Walking back to the parking lot, she asked me, "Where do you see this going, Cal?" Dawdle. I didn't answer right away. "I like you," I said. "I really do." She nodded. She'd heard the rest of it in the pause. "Okay," she said, not angry, just clear-eyed. We hugged at her car. It was a real hug, the kind that means something even when the thing it means is a kind of goodbye. It was raining the night I figured it out. Late November, the first real cold rain of the season, the kind that sounds like static on the windows. I was at my kitchen table, with a project file open in front of me, but not looking at it. I was thinking about Cecily leaving a bowl of tomatoes outside my door in September. I was thinking about her on the floor of my kitchen, talking me through a pipe fitting, handing me a wrench before I asked. I was thinking about 2 hours, on her couch with cold tea, about the way she'd said I tend to when I'd asked if she remembered things. I was thinking about how I'd walked through my own front door 14 months ago, a little lost, recently transferred to a new city, and within 3 days, she'd left a note on my door that said, "There's a recycling pickup on Thursdays. Blue bins only. CH, and somehow that it felt more like home than the apartment I'd been living in for 4 years in Hamilton. I closed the project file. I sat there for a long time. The next morning was a Saturday. I went upstairs at 9 with a coffee for her. She'd mentioned once, only once, that she liked the brand I bought, and I'd just started picking up an extra whenever I was at the store. Small thing. The kind of thing you don't examine too closely. She answered the door and looked at the coffee, then at me. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know." She let me in. The kitchen was warm. She had the radio on low, a CBC music program, something instrumental. I set the coffee on the counter and then, before I could talk myself out of it, I said, "I ended things with Bridget." Cecily turned from the counter. Her expression was careful. "When?" "A couple of weeks ago." "Why?" I looked at her. "You know why." The kitchen was very quiet, just the radio, low and distant, and the rain against the window. She set her mug down. "Cal," she said. Not like a schoolteacher this time. Something else. "I'm not saying I know what this is," I said. "I'm not saying I've figured anything out. I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't thinking about you. Every time I came home, every time your light was on." Cecily looked at the counter, then at the window, then at me. "She doesn't know you," she said quietly. "Bridget, she's known you for a few weeks." She paused. "I've known you for over a year." I waited. "I know how you take your coffee," she said. "I know you spend 20 minutes longer in the hardware store than any task actually requires. I know you go quiet when you're stressed, and then talk too much a day later when it breaks. I know you fixed that loose board on the back step without me asking because you knew I'd trip on it eventually." She stopped. Took a breath. "She doesn't know those things." "No," I said. "She doesn't." "I'm not 28, Cecily said. "I'm 33. "That still leaves a gap." "I know." She looked at me for a long moment. I've been telling myself it was just fondness. That it was just caring about a good tenant who became a good person to have around. Her voice stayed level, but something underneath it was not. I've been telling myself that for about 8 months. 8 months. I thought about the tomatoes, the umbrella, the scones and the cold tea in 2 hours I hadn't wanted to end. I walked across the kitchen. She didn't step back. I reached out and took her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to say no, and she looked down at it and then up at me, and something in her face that had been held very still for a very long time quietly let go. We didn't rush anything. That felt right for both of us. We had dinner in her kitchen that night, something she threw together from what was already in the fridge. Roasted vegetables and chicken, nothing complicated, the kind of meal that tastes better because of who you're eating it with. We talked until midnight. I went back downstairs. But something had settled. The following week, she came down to watch a film I'd been meaning to see. She fell asleep 20 minutes before the end, and I let her, and eventually I turned the television off and left a blanket over her and went to bed, and in the morning there was fresh coffee waiting on the counter between our doors, with a note that said only thank you. CH. Her sister came from Halifax in December. Margaret, older by 3 years, louder by several volumes. She shook my hand at the door like she was testing the structural integrity of it, looked me up and down, and said, "So you're the one who fixed her sink." "She fixed it," I said. "I just held things." She laughed at that, and I think that was the right answer. Christmas was quiet. Cecily went to her daughter's in Kingston for 3 days. I drove to Hamilton to see my parents, my mother who kept asking if I was eating enough, and my father who asked about the job site and then fell asleep in his chair by 4 o'clock. Standard. Comforting in its way. I texted Cecily on Christmas morning, just, "Merry Christmas. The tomatoes were the best part of the year." She replied an hour later. That might be the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Then, after a pause, "Merry Christmas, Cal." By February, we'd stopped pretending there were errands involved. I just went upstairs. She just came down. We had Sunday breakfasts at the table by her window with the plants I'd started learning the names of. The spider plant, the trailing pothos, the little succulent she'd had for 11 years that she refused to repot because she was afraid to disturb it. On a Thursday in late February, gray sky, snow on the ground, nothing remarkable about the day, she said, while we were washing dishes side by side. I wasn't sure this was going to be anything. "When?" I asked. "When you came up with the umbrella that night. I knew what it was about. And I told myself it was probably nothing, that you'd figure it out and it would go away." I handed her a bowl to dry. "But?" She smiled. Not a big smile, just the corners of it. "But you came back the next morning with coffee." I looked at her. "That was what did it." "You remembered," she said simply. "Without me saying anything, you just remembered." The window over the sink framed the backyard, brown and dormant under the snow. In 4 months, there'd be tomatoes out there again. She'd grow them and leave them and say nothing, and I'd find them, and that had always been, I realized, a kind of language all its own. I put my hand over hers on the edge of the sink. She turned her palm up and held on. I think about the tomatoes a lot still. The way they'd just appear, no note, no mention, no expectation of thanks. That was the whole thing, right there. Cecily wasn't trying to be noticed. She was just paying attention, and then doing something about it. Those are two different things, and I spent most of my adult life confusing them. I used to think connection was something you had to engineer. You go on the right dates, you say the right things, you build towards something. And there's nothing wrong with that, exactly. I liked Bridget. I genuinely did. She was warm and funny, and she made a real effort. But effort towards someone isn't the same as knowing them. You can be kind to a person without ever really seeing them, and I'd spent enough time on both sides of that equation to know the difference now. What Cecily had was something quieter and harder to name. She'd watched me move through a year of my life, the stressed weeks, the talkative days after, the 40 minutes on the kitchen floor with a wrench, and she'd just filed it all away without making a project of it. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't get talked about enough. Not cleverness, not strategy, just a willingness to pay close enough attention that you start to understand the shape of another person without them having to explain it. And I had to be honest enough with myself to recognize what I was doing. That was the harder part. It's easy to tell yourself you're just being sensible, just keeping things appropriate, just not wanting to complicate a perfectly good living arrangement. Those are all reasonable sounding things. But I knew, somewhere around the third time I came home and looked up at her window before I even got to the door, that I wasn't being sensible. I was being a coward dressed up as a realist. There's a difference, and it matters. What I've come to understand, and I don't think I could have understood it any younger than I am now, is that good things don't usually announce themselves. They accumulate. A bowl of tomatoes, a wrench handed over, at the right moment, 2 hours on a couch neither of us wanted to leave. None of it felt like a grand gesture. All of it added up to something I'd never quite had before. Work. And I almost missed it because I was waiting for something that looked more like what I thought love was supposed to look like. I think about what it took to actually say something. To go upstairs with a coffee I didn't need to bring and tell the truth I'd been sitting on for months. That took more out of me than I expected. Not because I was afraid she'd say no, exactly. More because saying it out loud meant I'd have to live with whatever came next, and that kind of honesty, the kind that can't be walked back, requires something from you that you have to work up to. We're still figuring it out, Cecily and I. There's no tidy conclusion. She still grows the tomatoes. I still take longer in the hardware store than any reasonable task requires. Some mornings I go upstairs, some mornings she comes down. It's quiet and it's real and it fits in a way I didn't know to look for. I used to think I needed to find someone who excited me. Turns out I needed to find someone who already knew me. Those aren't always the same person. When they are, you don't let it go.